Join me tonight on Twitch at 11:30 p.m. Eastern after the conclusion of Sunday Night Football, where we'll talk about everything that happened this week in the NFL. And join me Wednesday night at 9 p.m. Eastern to play some live NFL trivia for a chance to win cash prizes. Link in the description below. And now, on with our feature presentation. Time for a pop quiz. Who led the league in yards per touch during the 1983 season? The correct answer to that question is the man you're looking at right here. That man is Green Bay Packers fullback Gerry Ellis. When Ellis did this, he became just the third player in Packers history to lead the league in this category, and the first since Don Hudson did it all the way back in 1944 during the height of World War II. It was a fantastic season for Ellis where he was a threat in both the rushing and receiving game, and where he had the possibility to make magic happen every time he touched the ball. And 1 year before, his offensive coordinator publicly said that he sucked. What makes what Ellis did in 1983 all the more remarkable is that at the start of the calendar year, his offensive coordinator thought he was absolutely terrible. He threw Ellis under the bus, then sat down in the driver's seat, and with the maximum speed possible to run him over. And yet 1 year later, Ellis made his offensive coordinator eat his words, and came back stronger than ever. This is the story behind what might be the most surprising season for a player in Green Bay Packers history. Before I talk about the season in question, we need some context to understand just who Gerry Ellis is, how he was doing before 1983, and why his offensive coordinator publicly criticized him from out of nowhere. Our story begins all the way back in 1980, when the Los Angeles Rams drafted the Missouri fullback with their 7th round pick in the NFL draft. However, Ellis was always going to face an uphill climb just to make the roster. The Rams drafted 2 running backs ahead of him, and they had longtime fullback Colin Bryant, a 1,000-yard rusher in Wendell Tyler, and their 1st round pick from 1978 in Elvis Peacock. Ellis was cut during the preseason, as he was unable to crack his way onto the depth chart. However, the Green Bay Packers decided to pick up the player, and to say that it worked out would be a massive understatement. During the 1980 season, Ellis was a dual threat, running for 545 yards and over 4 yards per carry, and recording 48 receptions for 496 yards. In total, Ellis had over 1,000 yards from scrimmage as a rookie. For a 7th round pick who was cut after the preseason, that's obviously incredible. To put into perspective how solid he was, if you looked at every player to have 48 receptions, 545 rushing yards, and at least 4.3 yards per carry, the list consists of just 3 men. William Andrews on the Falcons, Colin Bryant on the Rams, and Gerry Ellis. That's it. And for an encore, Ellis would have an even better 1981 campaign. For those wondering whether Ellis was just a one-year wonder and just had a fluke of a rookie season, they quickly realized that Ellis was here to stay. During the 1981 season, Ellis started all 16 games and had 860 rushing yards, averaging 4.4 yards per carry. On top of that, he had 65 receptions for 499 yards, posting over 1,300 yards from scrimmage. Not only did Ellis lead the Packers in rushing that season by a fairly comfortable margin, but he finished second on the team in receptions, only behind Hall of Famer James Lofton. At the start of the 1980 season, he was without a team. He was signed on September 11th, and Week 1 was September 7th, just for a frame of reference. 16 months later, he had 2,400 yards from scrimmage, had found the end zone 15 times, and had played a vital part in Green Bay's offense. Unfortunately for him, the 1982 season would not quite go according to plan. The expectations for Gerry Ellis were really high entering the 1982 season. Just to give you an idea, here's an excerpt of a preview from one newspaper heading into the year. The writer predicted that Ellis was in line for a 1,000-yard season. Obviously, the writer could not have predicted that 2 months would be shaven off of the season due to the strike, and that it would be impossible for any runner to reach that coveted 1,000-yard mark because of how abbreviated the season was. But you get the idea. Ellis seemed to be showing no signs of slowing down as the Packers got ready to play in 1982. And the good news for the Packers was that they made it to the postseason. They finished the season with a 5-3-1 record, had a winning record for the first time since 1978, and qualified for the playoffs for the first time since 1972, when they won the NFC Central. The bad news, as you can tell from the clips, is that Ellis was very disappointing. Whereas anytime the Packers had success on offense at the start of the decade, it was often because of Ellis, in 1982, it was in spite of him. Ellis was held at 8 yards or less in 4 out of the 9 games. He only found the end zone once, which was a career low. He had 4 games out of 9 where he averaged 2 yards per carry or less. And he only finished the season with 368 yards from scrimmage, which over a 16-game season would be 654 yards, or not even half of what he put up in 1981. Without a doubt, however, the most concerning part about Ellis was his inability to hold on to the football. In 1981, Ellis touched the ball 261 times and coughed it up 5 times. That comes out to a fumble roughly once every 52 touches. In 1982, oh man, it was way worse than that. Despite the season only being 9 games long, he fumbled 6 times on 80 touches. That's an average of once every 13 touches. For some perspective on those numbers and the difference between 1981 and 82, If Ellis touched the ball 300 times in 1981, he could be expected to cough it up, give or take, 6 times. In 1982, if he touched the ball 300 times, that number jumps to 22 times. Ellis was an asset over his first 2 seasons, but in his third year, he was a massive liability, as he posted easily what was the worst year of his career. And when the playoffs rolled around, his offensive coordinator put him on blast. The Packers defeated the Cardinals in the first round of the playoffs, curb stomping them by a final score of 41-16. I talked about that game in a previous video of mine, and how the Packers set the tone of that contest early on because of some questionable coaching from Jim Hanifan on the Cardinals' sideline. So if you want to learn more about that, then click the card in the upper right corner. Now, the Packers, after winning their first playoff game since Super Bowl II all the way back in the 1967 season, had a date with the Dallas Cowboys in the second round. And offensive coordinator Bob Schnelker, who was in his first season with the team, decided, completely unprompted, to use this opportunity to put his fullback on blast, especially after Ellis fumbled yet again during that first round game. Now, if this was Schnelker saying something along the lines of, Ellis knows he hasn't had his best year, and he's had his struggles, but we trust him and we're going to make him a part of the game plan as we try and win this football game, that's one thing. That's a non-story. And I'm sure that in this situation, 99% of coaches would say something like that. Acknowledge that the player in question is struggling and isn't playing up to the standards that he knows he's capable of, and then talk him up and give him a confidence boost. Bob Schnelker did not do that. In fact, he took the complete opposite approach. Schnelker said that Ellis has had a crappy year, has let the team down, hasn't played well, hasn't produced the way he should have produced, hasn't run well, hasn't blocked well, and has made tons of mental mistakes. In other words, Schnelker was leaving no stone unturned. And to put the cherry on top of this cake, Schnelker said that the only reason Ellis was even playing was because the team had nobody better. Imagine being Gerry Ellis and hearing your offensive coordinator say that about you. You're playing by default, and that's it. And it's not even like a reporter brought this question up. From the looks of it, Schnelker just put his fullback on blast completely out of nowhere. The Packers lost to the Cowboys, and with Schnelker returning for another season as the team's offensive coordinator, it seemed from the outside looking in that Ellis' days in Green Bay were heavily numbered. Amazingly enough, they were not. They were just getting started. When the Packers took the field in 1983, I'm not sure anyone knew what exactly to expect from Gerry Ellis. His offensive coordinator was fed up with him, and flat out said that he was terrible and was costing the team games. The offensive coordinator talked about Mike Meade taking over the starting spot, and Meade was on the roster, so that seemed inevitable. Which is why it stunned just about everyone that by the time the 1983 season ended, not only was Ellis one of the better runners in all of pro football, but he was the leader across the entire NFL in yards per touch. If you want to talk about rising from the ashes out of nowhere, that's exactly what Gerry Ellis did in 1983. During this remarkable bounce-back season of his, Ellis had 696 rushing yards on a career-high 4.9 yards per carry. In the passing game, he made an impact as well, recording 52 receptions for a career-high 603 yards on a career-high 11.6 yards per catch. When you add all of that up, he had 1,299 yards from scrimmage on 193 touches, which comes out to an insanely high average of 6.7 yards per touch. To give you some perspective on how good Ellis was during the 1983 campaign, consider this. The list of players that season to have at least 600 yards rushing and 600 yards receiving was just 4 names long. The players in the 600-600 club included Walter Payton, William Andrews, Darren Nelson, and Gerry Ellis. Anytime you're in an exclusive club with Sweetness himself, that's not bad company to be in at all. And it was the second half of the season where Ellis really went off. Over the first half of the season, he was playing at a fine level, with 204 rushing yards and 374 receiving yards. He would have easily been on pace for a season of over 1,000 yards from scrimmage. But over the second half of the season, good luck containing him. Once the second half of the season hit, over those final 7 games, Ellis had 492 yards rushing and 229 receiving yards, which over the course of a 16-game season comes out to over 1,600 yards from scrimmage, or an average of over 100 per game. It seemed like Ellis was on a mission in 1983 to prove everyone wrong, including his offensive coordinator, and to bounce back in the strongest way possible. And not only did he do just that, but he was able to continue his career for a few more years afterwards. In 1984, Bart Starr was no longer the head coach of the Packers, as he was replaced by Forrest Gregg. However, despite the change, Ellis was still able to play a pretty big part in the offense, as during the 1984 season, he finished second on the team in yards from scrimmage, only behind James Lofton. He averaged over 4.7 yards per carry, which was the second highest total of his career at that point, had 893 yards from scrimmage, and scored 6 touchdowns. Ellis was quickly becoming an effective runner in the league, making the most of every touch he got. He was 3rd in yards per carry in 1983 and 7th in this category during the 1984 season. But in 1985, Ellis led the league in it with an incredible 5.5 yards per carry. He wasn't playing a huge role in the passing game anymore, only posting 24 receptions for 206 yards. But in the running game, when you have over 100 carries and you're averaging well over 5 yards every time the quarterback hands you the ball, you're clearly doing something right. Ellis became the 3rd player in Packers history at the time, alongside Cecil Isbell in 1938 and Tobin Rote in 1951, to lead the league in this category. And once again, he turned on the Jets in the second half of the season, averaging over 6.6 yards per carry over the final 6 games of the year. Ellis would play one more year in the NFL before never playing again after that 1986 season. Gerry Ellis had a pretty good career in the NFL, all things considered. When you're a 7th round pick and you play 7 seasons in the NFL while starting a ton of games and leading the league a few times in some pretty notable categories, you can't be too upset about how that turned out. But it's crazy just how surprising his 1983 season was. Whether this was just a ridiculously cold take on Schnelker's part to call Ellis out like that, or whether that call out was the motivation and jumpstart that Ellis needed to get back on track, we're not entirely sure. However, to have your offensive coordinator call you a liability, and then 1 year later while playing for that same offensive coordinator, you take the league by storm? As Gerry Ellis found out, that's gotta feel pretty good. Get your official Jaguar Gator 9 merchandise by going to jg9shop.com, and be sure to like this video, ring the notification bell, subscribe down below if you haven't already, as it helps the channel out a lot, and be sure to check out Twitch every Wednesday night at 9 p.m. Eastern for your chance to play NFL Trivia and win cash prizes, link in the description below. If you want to see videos like this condensed down to 60 seconds, then follow me on TikTok at JaguarGator9 and subscribe to 60-Second NFL History on YouTube. To see highlight videos of players throughout the history of the NFL, subscribe to JG9 Highlights. Also, special thanks to all of our Patreon supporters who help get the channel. Your support is greatly appreciated. See how you can become a patron and request future video topics in the description below.